Welcome everyone to Seb's podcast. This is episode 62, and today we have a very an interesting topic and a very unique one that I don't think I've had anybody else on the podcast talk about. We talk about ADUs every week, from developers to architects to investors to homeowners, to just anyone that you can think of, except for today's topic, right, which is the permitting process, basically, and what that looks like. And we have a very special guest. Her name is Stacy Strauss with Srour and Associates. I'm going to give a quick introduction so you guys can get to know her a little bit better, and then I'm going to hand it off to her for more insight, on what it is that she does. So Stacy is the principal at Srour and Associates, a firm renowned for its expertise in assisting developers and property owners in navigating the complexities of building in South Bay. And definitely it's very complex. So I'm excited to talk about that today. And also all over SoCal. With over 40 years of experience, Srour and Associates has become a trusted partner for those looking to streamline the approval process at the city, county, and state levels. Stacy is an organizational powerhouse and a natural multitasker, as most women are. Right? That's why we are best, bringing decades of experience from both the private and the government sectors. Her unique insights in the intricate web of government regulations and approval processes makes her an invaluable asset to her clients. Stacy's approach is all about efficiency. She leverages her extensive network of architects, designers, engineers, and landscape architects to build cohesive development teams or integrate seamlessly into existing ones, ensuring projects get the approvals that they need without unnecessary delays. And I can continue on, but I'll leave you guys with that. I mean, as you guys can see, she has a lot of experience. This is a topic that's very complex for most people who are tapping into the ADU space or in the real estate space. So I'm not gonna confuse you guys with more information. I'm gonna hand it off to her, and she'll be able to give you guys a lot more insight in a way where you're able to digest this information and understand what happens in the permitting process. So I'll hand it off to you, Stacy. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you. Yeah, wow, that was a really nice introduction. Thank you. And thanks for having me. It is an important topic, right? Because ADUs are the idea of them in California is not new, by the way. We see trends really that are organized by kind of generationally, right? So in the past, we saw things like they would be called granny flats, and these were just organically came about. Um, where you would have somebody building maybe go to their garage for a family member who might, this family wants to live multi-generationally in that home. And that was, we can see that trend from, a good 100 years ago. And then it stopped. Right. Then we saw jurisdictions start to say that those are not permissible, right? And we saw the single family home trend, and we saw jurisdictions do things like when they would discover an illegal granny flat, forcing a property owner to even dump concrete down septic, right down a sewer line to ensure
Mhm.
they weren't going to use it. This kind of heavy-handed, right, approach. But now what we're seeing is that we have a housing crisis in California and I think all over the country. And that's because people want to move to where jobs are and they want to live where they're not commuting in extra unusual amounts of time. They want to maybe live multi-generationally. They want to and especially in California where the weather is good, they recognize that they don't necessarily need a massive amount of space. They just need a good, nice place to live, and they can get their outdoor space just outside, right? So this idea of like this home with a white picket fence and a massive yard where you're having a lawn and you're cutting it and you're watering it is using resources that maybe we don't have, and it's also left over from a different generation where maybe our values aren't aligning with that anymore. So this is not a new concept at ADU, but it was taken away from us, and now the state recognizes it as a very valuable tool in restoring the ability to have housing in California. So our office has been around for about 40 years, and then the previous owner did, ages out, and I had worked for her for a few years, and then my husband and I actually went into business together. And so he and I are the principals of this small service organization, right? We're a small company that we provide pre-construction services, right? Our goal is to do anything related to pre-construction so that we hand you plans that are approved and ready to build, right? We don't build anything, we don't design anything, and we're not technical. Our job is to make it so that your process is very smooth and you're ready to build the second we hand you those plans. And so we'll pull together that whole team, or you might tell us, this is who I want to use. I've already identified my designer, or anyone else that's part of the process, and we'll work with that person, or we'll tell you, uh, if you don't have the ideas, we'll say these are the technical components that are needed, and we'll pull that team together and help you so that you're not ending the process saying, I'll never do this again. You're actually ending the process saying, oh, I got this. If I pull the right team together, I can do
Right.
this, right? This is okay. Because that's really our experience, is that we want you to be happy when you start building, not, oh, I can never go into that city again, right? So uh, can I back up and just talk about kind of how cities work, right?
I was
Um,
gonna say that, yeah, before we
yeah.
get into where you fall into the category of, a lot of our listeners know, or by this point, if they've been hearing the other episodes, you kind of understand that you need an architect to help you in the design phase. You need a contractor to help you in the construction phase. I want you to kind of tell them, where do you fall into place in that
Mhm.
process and as part
Okay.
of the team. But before we get there, yes, I was going to say, let's back it up and let's give them more context as to why it's so complex to work with different cities and what their thought process is when really coming up with a lot of these legislations and regulations around building codes,
Okay.
just building in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a city just as our primary example, because most of these are in cities. Every once in a while, if you're in a unincorporated area like a county, like the county of LA or the county of Riverside, you can just just replace when I say city, just replace it with county. So the first thing really to do is think about this, like, who is my permitting agency, right? And a lot of times it will save you time and money to hire an expediter like us, because we do this day in and day out, and we don't go into your office and say, I'm just, I'm going to practice accounting today, right? Or I'm going to practice it, because the reality is we just stay in our lane. We all do the things and we do it efficiently, right? So it's no problem to just hire someone who does this day in and day out. Like I said, I don't design because that's not my space, right?
Right.
I just stick to what I do. So, um, but let's think about what our jurisdiction is, our permitting agency. And most of the times it is a city, and that city has sort of three major components that they are um, reviewing before they can issue a permit to build, right? So your general contractor can take that permit and start in those plans, permitted plans that are stamped approved, and start building it, right?
Right.
And those three major areas are, on the planning side, they're looking at the zoning requirements. The building and safety side, they're looking at that is a safe, habitable area, that we're not putting someone in harm's way. It's not going to fall down. It has appropriate ability to leave the area in case of fire or other emergency. And then there's the grading and drainage or public works side, because they want to look at when a private property meets the public. They want to look at, are you is water leaving your property and draining onto my property, the city's
Hmm.
property, right? And and how that water is treated, right? So it's either going to leave the property by going down into, surface water might go down into the soil and what happens there, or it's going to leave by runoff, right? And they're trying to ensure that we don't create more problems with any development. So those are the three main areas: planning, building and safety, and public works. They're looking at your grading and drainage and where your private property meets your public property. So it's important to know that cities also they responsive to a question. They're not going to tell you what the question is. They're not there to do your work.
Right.
They're going to respond to you. So if you ask them, can I have an ADU? They're going to say yes, right? They're now forced to allow it. So by the way, just kind of where we've been and where are we now, right? Remember, we saw this trend for a long time. Cities took it away, but the state came in and said we have a housing crisis and passed statewide legislation in 2019. The Housing Crisis Act, SB 330, had a component in it for ADUs and said we are going to use ADUs to help us address the housing crisis. And in that, cities have to allow for an ADU if it meets certain criteria. Whereas an
Right.
example before, right? So I work a lot with the city of Hermosa Beach. It's just a little beach town in LA County, but they have their permitting agency. They have their own permitting power. And prior to 2019, prior to this law changing, they allowed for ADUs if your property was a minimum of 4,000 square feet. Well, 80% of the properties in the city of Hermosa Beach are not 4,000 square feet, maybe 90%, right? So that
Right.
effectively was a zero, right? So the state saw that and said, you're blocking ADUs. And so they passed a statewide legislation and said, you have to allow it as, I'm going to use the term, by right development. So it's very important for anyone who wants an ADU to think to themselves, is this a by right or a discretionary review? Okay, so discretionary means the city staff can, or planning commission or city council can make a decision about my application. That's a discretionary review. When they get to decide and they get to say yes or no. The state passed law in 2019 saying it is no longer discretionary. You can't impose certain requirements. And so if they meet these requirements, it is a by right development. So we're talking in most cases in the state of California, any jurisdiction, if you meet the requirements, it is a by right development. So that's a really
And even
important
some
thing
of
to know.
those, I would say some of those requirements have gone a lot more lenient now as well, right? Because again of state
Absolutely.
law legislations passing through. But yeah, even when state law, passed the law that every city needed to allow for ADUs, there were still a lot of cities that were giving a lot of pushback and adding more requirements on top of,
Oh,
the
that's a great
process
point.
itself. But
That is a
now,
great point.
yeah, and I think what I've seen too, and working with other people in planning, the psychology behind planners too, and what their thought process is. Like you mentioned, if you go up to the city planning department and say, I want to build an ADU, you're kind of expected to know what you're doing. They're not there to do the work for you. On top of that, many of them are trying to stay updated with legislation. I mean, these
Oh, great
legislations
point.
keep updating themselves since what, 2017, then 2020, then 2023, and we have a couple right now that are also in the works. So you have to think about, city planners are always thinking of liability, right? They're taught to, and this is what I've heard just from other planning
Mhm.
people who are now in the ADU world with planning background. They're like, hey, we were taught a certain mindset in which we don't want to be held liable for any of the submittals, right? And so we have to abide by certain rules and a certain process. And so many times I see this war between the ADU consultants and the planning people, and they're kind of like going at each other, right? Because ADU people have to teach the planning department. The planning department seems to give them a lot of pushback and corrections that really aren't needed because, they don't really know their government code. So it's this constant like bickering of pointing the finger at each other rather than really understanding like how to communicate with each other. So I think if you really understand how to read the code, then now you can refer to the code when you're communicating with planning, because many times you may have someone on the other end of the email who can say, hey, you can't build an ADU based on XYZ. You need sprinklers, right? But if you know your code, you can say, well, according to X, Y, and Z, I don't actually need them. And here is, here's government code 658, blah, blah, blah. But like,
Yes,
who has time to do all that? Your
that is a
average
good point. That's
homeowner,
us. Yeah.
that's when you reach out to somebody like you, right? Who's been doing
Mhm.
this in and out, day in, day out. As you said, you stay in your lane. But just to give people an insight as to how complex this can be. And so you don't have to technically like go out there and learn the code, but you do have to
Mhm.
choose to work with the right professional who's been doing this for so long, because as you can see yourself, it's very complicated, right? And I think
Mhm.
if you could touch a little bit more on why it's kind of set up that way, or just a little bit more insight on, the
Yeah.
the process itself. Yeah.
I mean, it's not really even necessarily you're gonna see a different person doing all those 3 functions. It just depends on the size of the city. They may have
Hmm.
3
Hmm.
separate people, but the reality is this is what cities are looking for. Do you meet the zoning requirements? Do you meet the building and safety requirements and the public works or the grading and drainage requirements? So when we think about our by right development, in all likelihood, you have a by right development, and you also think about whether I'm repurposing an uninhabitable area to make it habitable, right? Such as a garage, which now is allowed under state law, or if I'm building new structure. So we tease out some of those things and we look at what parts of the law apply to each one. So planning, their primary function is to look at the zoning, right? Is the height, the setbacks, the open space requirements, the parking requirements. Are those kinds of things unlock coverage? That's what planning typically, they have a few things they look at overall, but in general, that's what like a planner is looking at: height, setback, open space, parking, um, lot coverage, or buildable floor area. That's generally for a development, but in the ADU function, those vary. Those are different, right? So our height, we were told at one point the ADU could not exceed X height. It's actually changed since then.
Right.
Um, our setback, well, guess what? They might impose a setback of 10 feet for a new development, but for ADU law says 4 feet.
4
Although
feet.
but you have to know because front yard setback could be still imposed on an ADU. So we have to, there's a lot of intricacies, but in general, that's what a planning staff is going to be looking at. Do you meet, and in a traditional development, parking has certain requirements for the city, but in ADU, they cannot require any parking. And if you take parking, like if you converted a garage space that had been parking for instance, the primary residence, you do not have to replace that parking, nor do you have to provide parking for that ADU. So it's really important to know. And remember, they are traditionally trained. They're looking at new developments. So all of a sudden, when we hand them a state law, not only does it feel bad for that planner that the state is telling them what to do, they
Right.
have some maybe competing interests for their city. I walked into a city for a totally different matter recently. Remember, you have to remember the state law has been around now for 5 years. It's like they're slowly getting used to it. But this is recent. I walked into a particular city and on another matter, and I happened to hear the planning manager giving inaccurate advice or response to property owners from her city. And, when I just listened and I happened to know her, and I said, uh, name not to be disclosed,
Yeah.
such and such, that's a violation of the state law. She said, we have our own ordinance, and I'm going to tell you the difference between those ordinances in a minute. And I said, "But that's violating the state law, and that's not accurate information." Right? And she is adamant, right? So of course, I don't typically like to advocate because my other projects then suffer, right? Of course. But
Right.
I do like to just point out, the differences. So anyway, I do want to jump to a city ordinance versus the state law. So by the way, the state law is the law of the land in California, and it has the ADU requirements. Cities may choose to adopt their own ordinances, but they do not have to. They may just simply use the state law. Because if a city goes ahead and does an ordinance and it violates the state law in any way, their entire ADU ordinance is out of compliance and not imposable.
Mm,
Okay,
mhm,
so
mhm.
really just focus on what does the state law say, but that's really about zoning, right? We've seen some tweaks to the ADU laws over the years, and those tweaks have been really to make the whole thing more usable. So, for instance,
Right.
we used to have a cap of 16 feet. Now we have it 18 feet and really 25 feet if you
25.
need it to match a roof line, right? And that was just to make it more usable because cities would find that little area of the law and use it against you, right? Because it's not that they have ill intention; it's that they have their own competing interests, right? Um, so s- so I wanted to tell you that to be very familiar with the state law, right? And then if they cite their own ordinance and it conflicts with state law, then as a reminder, their entire ADU ordinance is out of compliance and not usable. Um, where we see cities who haven't adopted their own ADU ordinance um, and is effective is we worked with a couple cities in the South Bay area because they're very they have development that lots that need to be recycled, right? So if you look at like Orange County, those are like big planned developments. They're all built at the same time, right? In South Bay, Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, Torrance, Gardena, Lawndale, El Segundo, this area, and lots of parts of LA and other areas of Southern California, properties are developed at different times. So they have different, they recycle, lots need to be repurposed at a variety of different times, right? So when a city has some issues, such as we have some lots that have, let's say, 3 units there that were built 100 years ago, but now it's falling down and needs to be recycled. It's time to scrape what's there and build something new. The trend had been they were building single family residences, right?
Mhm,
The state, remember, another part of the state law says no net loss, right? We cannot take away the 3 unit. Cities can only approve a project that replaces the exact number of what was there. So a lot of times we use the ADUs in order to um, replace the number of units that were there. So this is just no net loss, not necessarily even adding, right?
right.
But we might even have a situation where we have 4 units, for instance. So a city might choose to adopt their own ADU ordinance that goes above and beyond the state law to address
Mhm,
some of their own unique situations. And we work with the cities in this area to show them don't bother adopting a law that's the same as the state. You're going to use the state law. But if you have unique situations, go ahead. And so in the case of, like, for instance, Hermosa Beach, we can actually have a single family with 2 ADUs. So that can be up to 2,000 square foot ADUs. And the reason they did that is that they went above and beyond the state law to address some of their unique situations. Um,
I'd say
and just
San Diego is another good one as an example, right? They have the density bonus rule. So you're able to add, and I think if you dedicate a certain amount of units towards affordable housing, they allow you to build even more, which is crazy.
so
Like
that's
there
just
was
state
one,
law. Yeah.
right?
So,
There was one
so
in particular that I think they were going to build about 27 ADUs on a single family,
mm,
lot because of the zoning type. I think it was in a transit area,
oh,
but
transit oriented community at TOC
right.
in LA.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah.
So right, so cities can become more creative, right,
Right.
when they're trying to adjust their own housing needs. And that is a great way to approach a city who is a no. Like we call these cities sometimes Dr. No, like you walk in and the immediate answer is no, right? Um, but we help them understand this is your way to solve your own problems and not always be fed what you need to do from the state, because we know they're resentful from the state. Even though the state gave us
Right.
some ways to accommodate our needs, they hate it, right? They're being forced and they hate it. So if we allow them to take their needs and start to see it that they can solve their own problems with these laws, they can't violate the law, but they can start solving their own problems. Sometimes it goes down a little bit better for them.
Would you say,
Oh, go ahead.
no,
Go ahead.
I was gonna chime in and ask, would you say that in working with a lot of these cities, even in South Bay, for example, at some point, I mean, they see you walking in and working on behalf of your clients. Do you think that building relationships with these people, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with humans, right, and people, and I think just being more mindful of their position and what they have to do on their end and working together as a team, would you say that building relationships with some of these people has made an impact or a difference in streamlining the process or being able to at least work together better?
Yeah, so I have a great relationship with the cities we work in, and does everyone here in our office, because in the end, our job is to get you a permit, right?
Right,
Our job is also compliance, right? So our job is to keep our clients complying with the law, right? We don't want to put something out there that is not going to get approved. So our whole
right,
goal is for compliance. And I see myself as trying to help the city staff, right? I want to make their burden less so that they can just pick up my project and, go through a checklist, objective checklist. When they start to put in subjective items, that's when we all have problems, right?
right.
So we want to keep it an objective checklist and then get our projects approved, right? Um, I want an I want a potential developer of an ADU, whether you be a private property owner and you're just developing one ADU on your property, or you are a regular spec developer and you are doing ADUs all over. I want you to understand that when you need to have certain things at certain times, right? So remember, these are responsive people. They're not going to do it for you. So they need to understand what the parameters are of your lot in a survey, right? They
Right.
need to have property corners identified so they can identify that whether the height you're proposing is acceptable or not. So that's a survey. A lot of times they need a title report to know if there are any existing easements that we cannot build on top of. Those are kind of basic things. And then they need to see a set of plans, not fully construction. We don't need a construction set of plans yet. We just need a zoning set, right? We need a footprint, elevations, roof plan, so that they can determine from the first step, that planner, does it meet the zoning requirements, right? They need to see what exists on the lot and what we're proposing,
Be
right?
proposing.
Right. So that's our first step with planning. Once planning clears us, we can then submit to building and safety with a set of construction drawings. And that's really, how is that building going to stand up? And I think a lot of times, especially someone new to the whole world of ADUs, doesn't realize that you still have to comply with the law. This is not an inexpensive process, right? You still have to have a survey, which I know can cost a few $1,000s. You still have to have plans, which I know can cost some money. You still have to upgrade to current building code standards in some cases. You still have to have appropriate safety. Your electricity has to be adequate. Your plumbing has to be adequate. Now, cities can't say no if you want to connect on one, sewer line. Yes, that is correct. But we still have to have adequate basic services for our ADU. It's a residential unit. So that's the building and safety side. And then, of course, they can require you to have grading and drainage plans if you're adding over a certain amount of square feet. They need to know that you're going to adequately have water that's being treated. It's not going to pool on your property and cause, for instance, another structure to collapse, right? Um,
It is development, right? And I think a lot of people
Absolutely.
forget. They think that they're not doing development when they're building an ADU. And the
That is
reality
correct.
is you are. It's a smaller scale type of development, but at the end of the day, it has the same process. And even though the state has made it more feasible and ADU friendly for people to do these things, you still have to abide by, as you said, building and safety codes, I mean, government codes. You still have to go through the motion as if you were building a 5,000 square foot home.
Larger
And,
home.
whether
That
it's
is correct.
500 square feet or 5,000 square feet, the process and making sure that it's a habitable space according to code. And then building code changes every 3 years, right? Or they
Correct. And we're
update.
about to hit a cycle. So
Yeah,
anything, so at the end of this year, 2024, our last submittals under this current building code cycle are going to be reviewed. Come January 1 of 2025, we will use the new building codes.
right.
They're usually just tweaks, right? So a lot of times we see that they are related to things like environmental. So they want to have, um, more insulation or things like that. Title
Like the one,
24,
I think
solar.
the one we had a couple years, well, 3 years ago was the new ground up construction requiring solar panels, right?
Correct. So prior to that, we saw solar ready requirement. Then 3 years
Right.
ago, we saw must implement solar. We are seeing something similar with gas appliances. We're moving to electric, so they start to ease into it by saying, uh, get get electric ready, and then we'll start to see electric imposed, right? And these are just ways to start achieving some of our other goals in the state of California, right?
Yeah, and I think as when you consult with somebody like you, you're looking, I'm assuming, at the entire project for both short term and long term for that client. I run into situations where a lot of tenants didn't, or owners didn't think about subdividing or splitting these utility costs.
Mm.
And now when they're wanting to rent out their ADU, they're having a hard time figuring out who's going to pay for what and how much does someone pay for what, right? So right
Those
now
are
that
great things, right? To think about early on. If you don't think about it early on, though, remember there are things like sub meters.
right,
We
right.
can install, have it help you think about getting a sub meter installed to
Hmm.
specifically segregate the usage from
Yes.
a rental. Hmm.
Yeah, and I know that we're past the time that I told you, but this
Yep. Okay.
conversation's so good. I like to
Yeah.
geek
I'll
out on this
stay
stuff.
out. Yeah, I'll stay
And I
on
know
with
you
you.
do. But I did have one more topic before we go that I wanted
Yeah.
both of us to touch on is AB 1033. What are your thoughts? Where do you see it going in the next year?
Hmm.
Considering that there's a couple cities, I know San Jose just said and raised their hand that they're now opting into it. Cities like Santa Monica, Berkeley, Sacramento, and even some, in SoCal are in the works. I think Long Beach is probably another one that we'll see adopting or opting into AB 1033. What's your take on it? And maybe give people context, right? Like, what is AB 1033? How do you see that impacting even South Bay, where you do most of your business? And what are your thoughts on it?
Okay. So we see a host of laws come out every year to try to address a couple things. State law around housing, right? And also to try to correct some of the injustices that have happened over the years, right? For certain communities. So when cities did things like um, create a minimum lot size, that a lot must be X size in order to just exist. Um, Many communities see that as a way to prevent them from splitting their lot, and it prevents that intergenerational wealth from being perpetuated, right? So the fastest way to having security and just personal wealth is real estate. So when we saw the trends in the state of California imposing minimum lot sizes, that really eclipsed certain populations from allowing them to deed land to the next generation, eclipsing their ability to build wealth. Okay, so some of these state laws are designed to address that, and specifically SB 9, which was a state law that allows for that requires that cities lift that minimum lot size so long as someone's deciding to split their lot and it meets the minimum requirements of 1,200 square feet and some other requirements like a 60-40 split, et cetera, they may split their lot and either develop their own wealth, like kind of cash out on a portion of their lot,
And I think
or
SB9 now is having a little bit of pushback in some charter cities, right?
correct. So charter cities won a lawsuit saying, hey, you can't impose this. But you know what'll happen on that one is my prediction is the state will say, oh, we need to just tweak this a little bit, and then it'll come back into the play. But let me just tell you that cities like the city of Los Angeles, they are not opposed, as far as we
Right.
can tell, to SB9 because they use it to meet their numbers. And I know we had talked, we wanted to talk a little bit about RENA numbers, and RENA numbers, just for our listeners to understand, a lot of times they get a bad rap. These are numbers that cities have to plan to achieve within a certain cycle of time, right? This is
Right.
housing that's needed. These numbers don't come from the state, they come from local, right? So the locals, the something like SCAG, they get together, they determine their housing needs, they put them forward, and then those numbers gets translated up to the state, and then the state does use them and adopts the RENA numbers, housing numbers, and then cities are to plan to meet those numbers. And so sometimes cities use ADUs to help them achieve their RENA numbers. Sometimes they use SB9 lot splits because an SB9 lot split can have up to a duplex on each resulting lot. Another part of SB9 is you don't even have to split your lot. You can just
Right.
do maximum density, right?
Right.
So those are ways for cities to get their numbers. We are seeing a little bit of pushback here and there. I think the state will tweak that language. So the next one is um, the idea of condominiumizing. Um, when you have an ADU, and what that does is it allows a property owner who may have built an ADU to sell off that ADU as what we call an airspace condominium. Okay, so a lot of times people think of the word condominium and they instantly think of like a tower of 200 units and they're like flats, right? But the reality is condominium is just a term that is defined in the state law about property ownership, right? So the lot itself is owned in an undivided interest, and then the units are owned what we call fee simple. So if an ADU is going to be condominiumized and then allow for individual ownership, they're still owning the lot with the other unit owner, even if that unit is the primary residence or now like a 2,500 square foot, what we had thought of as a single family residence now becomes a condominium. And the ADU, which is a tiny house, right, becomes another condominium unit, right? So that's if a city under this new state law adopts and is willing, they want to participate in the law, they're allowing for condominiumizing of an ADU. But I want to just clarify the process, even if a city says they're going to participate in this state law, so this is voluntary. Not every city is doing it. In fact, just a handful at this time. Um, if they want to, it doesn't automatically give the end user, just, it's not a wand, right? You still have to go through the process of condominiumizing, which I will tell you is a very large amount of money for a typical property owner. So it requires a tentative map and a final map, and then a condominium map, along with CCNRs, and usually a budget. So I would, if I were to be condominiumizing a single family with an ADU, that type of property, I would budget about $75,000 for that process, and and um, look at whether your lender, if you have a loan on the property, is willing to allow for condominiumizing, because they have a say. They're beneficiaries and they have a say in that too. There's some complications there. Just because the city is participating doesn't make it easy. It's a
Exactly.
it's a long process. Can take about a
Yeah, so
year.
I think it's going to take some time. I mean, I know I don't know exactly what the process is in Seattle, but I believe it's a thing out there where a lot of people are now selling them off. But yeah, those fees can add up, as you mentioned. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a lot for, let's say, a homeowner, right, who has one property and now they're thinking of condoizing that ADU in the back.
Hmm.
So I
That's
think in
right.
specific scenarios, if it's for a family member or if it really makes sense, then people will do it. But I think right now, I mean, most of the time people barely have enough to convert the space and go through that process, right? And if they don't want to pay even for a surveyor, like having to pay for the condoization process,
Subdivision fees. Yeah, it's subdividing land
it's
just like any
subdividing.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of our specialties is we're subdivision assistants, right? So we it's mostly new construction,
Mhm.
and we go through the whole process with our clients of starting with um, an application to the city all the way through the end of recording and then having those new legal descriptions created and helping them so that the grant deed says, unit whatever number and of this lot, and they can deed over that newly created. So usually it's like a, 2 unit to 10 unit condominium. That's what we specialize in.
That's
Um,
awesome. I mean, I think
mhm.
I'm curious to see it all unfold. I think it's going to take time because of the added cost, because of the process. I mean, it took us this far to get to where we're at now, and we still have a lot of work to do with the city. So I think the fact that AB 1033 just rolled out this year, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of selling of condos, this year, but maybe in the next year or two until cities not only opt in, but actually have a streamlined process on what, the CCNRs are going to look like. What is everything else that you just mentioned going to look like?
So
Yeah.
remember, actually, you're right. So I think in this case, we do have a process because it's a state law called the Subdivision Map Act, right? So we know what this, and it's a Davis-Sterling Act. We know what the CCNRs are going to look like, and we know what a tentative map and a final map and a condo map minimum has to have.
Right.
I think at this time, the roadblock to this is, first off, we just have a handful of cities who want to do it. And
Hmm.
then those users who understand that this is a very lengthy, expensive process that will result in something great, but they have to have that
What do
tolerance
you,
level.
what would you say the process is to do that? How
Right.
long,
That's what I was
how
saying.
long will it
It's
take?
about a year, right? So our office would apply for what we call a tentative map, get that approved by the city, and that's going to be an administrative review. Thankfully, we don't have to go to hearing. Cities can't block it. It's not a discretionary review. Remember, it's a by right if they're participating. Then once we get a tentative map approved, we go to a final map that gets submitted for technical review and any clearance items such as fire department, sanitation, low impact development. There's a lot of clearances that go with that, urban forestry, et cetera. And then once all those departments review and approve it, and then we have to get that final map recorded with the county, and then we prepare the condominium map and CCNRs, and that gets recorded, and then we have new legal description, and all that is could be about $75,000 and take about a year. And there's some tech,
Crazy.
yeah, there's a lot of that's just a very broad stroke. There's a lot that goes into that. I can't
And I
even get
and I
into it
know
here.
that. I mean, I understand that process. I'm actually selling a condo right now in Irvine, so we're getting all that stuff ready, including the budget sheet, right? But I
Hmm.
think a lot of people are probably expecting that this is going to be a little bit easier because it's just one condo or two condos or maybe three, right? But it looks like it's not. It just applies to whether it's one
Yeah,
condo or
regardless of
one
the
unit.
number, yes, you hit the nail on the head. Regardless of the number of condominiums, so if it's 2 or 200, the state
Mhm.
law applies equally. That is correct. It doesn't, just because we're doing 2 units, it doesn't make it any easier. It's the same process. That's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
state law.
really good.
Hmm.
Really good insight coming from your end. So I know that we both have to cut it short here. Not really, we're way past our time, but it was a very interesting conversation. You gave us so much insight. How can people connect with you? I'm going to continue conversations with you on the back end, and I'm having this ADU Play community that's rolling out. I'm having my first call on Thursday, so I'd love for you to join. And I know you've been
Really.
joining the ADU Women's Mastermind, so I'm going to continue to have those in that platform. But it would be cool to continue this conversation and maybe have a Q&A where people come
Oh,
and ask
yes.
you questions, right? But in the meantime, while that happens, how can people connect with you, consult with you? And one thing I want to mention, guys, you can work with Stacy on a single family home wanting to convert your 500 square foot garage or you want to build like 5,000 units. I mean, it's crazy, right? Like you can work with her on both sides of the spectrum. And I just wanted to throw that out there,
Thank
um,
you.
especially with your experience. Yes.
Yeah, like I said, we're pre-construction, right? Where our goal is to give you approved plans. So you can contact us to assist with anything as simple as, oh, the city's telling me to get an address for the new unit and record this covenant that, and remember the covenant is that I will keep this as a residential unit on my property if they, that's what they want, remember, because this is the whole goal is to create housing. So if you need something as simple as just like two little items, yeah, we'll do that. Or if you need something as much as I don't even know who to pull together for this team and get this submitted to the city and go through all the different departments for review and get approvals and get all the clearance items, addresses, and ADU covenants and everything recorded and etc. Yes, we can do the full thing or we can do just a little bit. It's up to you and what your development needs are. So how do you reach us is by telephone 310-372-8433. That's the office number, 310-372-8433. My email, Stacy, Stacy at esrour.com. That's a leftover email from the past owner, which I know is a kind of a funny name. Srour is the previous owner's former husband's name. We just never changed it because in the South Bay it's just well known, even though it's like this funny name. Um, and we did create our company called Real Estate Development Services Group, REDS Group, because it just speaks to what we're doing. We're helping the development community. So you can reach me by email, you can reach me by phone, you can click on my website, SrourandAssociates.com, and hyperlink to us there. You can reach out to Stephanie and she'll put you in touch with me. You can send questions to her and she'll forward them on to me. Um, so how do we work and how do you pay us, right? Because we love what we do and we're so appreciative of that, but we also have lots of bills to pay and this is our business, right?
Right.
So typically we get contacted by someone and we kind of hear what the scope of work is and we have certain prices where like, you know what, just to help you with getting a ADU covenant, signed, notarized, recorded, county recording fees, things like that, it's probably going to be about $500, right? Because that includes county recording fees, right? Or if you just need us to apply for an address, it's probably about $300, right? By the time we get the site plan and show the city what they need and a title report and grant deed and give them where the area addresses already are and how that's all going to work, fine. A start to finish, and what we call plan check and permitting is probably around $3,500, depending on what you're doing. And we'll just listen to what you need and we'll tell you this is how much it is. But we're basically consultants. We don't take a percentage. We're not a hotline, so we don't really like take a whole bunch of calls and ask people tell us what they need and we just tell them the answer because our insurance doesn't really work that way. We need to
Right.
have a
Right.
client signed on with us so that we can give professional advice. Um, yeah, but that's how we work. But we thankfully we do love what we do and feel appreciative that we get to do it every day.
Yeah, and I think it's a very unique niche within the ADU niche, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, uh, when you're starting off with your project, or or you have a team who's doing projects, you have your preferred architect, structural engineer, your contractor, your lender,
Surveyor,
you
yeah,
know,
lender.
your potential title rep as well. And then here comes Stacy to like save the day in any of
And
these
pull them all
areas
together.
and
Yeah.
really put them all together, but really
Mhm.
helping you between the architect and the contractor. You're like somewhere in that, in
Yeah, that's
that
right.
phase, right? But
Yeah,
also
pre-construction.
construction. But yeah, the pre-construction phase is where you'd want to reach out to her, and she can help you, bridge that gap between you and the architect and the contractor and just make your life easier. Because I think a lot of people get overwhelmed and like, who do I choose as an architect? And I don't even know what to ask the architect because I don't even know how to read architectural plans, right? Who's the
Yeah,
contractor that I'm going to go with? And so working with somebody who has the experience is definitely worth,
right.
whatever fees you have, they're paying and buying back not only time but
Time.
experience. and money,
Yeah.
because the money that they're paying you, you're helping them save time in the long run,
Oh,
right? Versus
yeah. Holding
one
costs
person trying
alone.
to do it
Yes.
themselves. So awesome.
Yes, agreed. And I will just tell you, we will also, there is some savings. Like as an example, the city of LA has ADU pre-approved ADU plans that are free, right? And we're going to
Right,
point you to those and say, if this works for you, this is pre-approved. You don't need to go have it designed. If this works for you, use it, right? It's plan checked, it's approved. Let's stick it on your survey and let's just get this done, right?
right.
Um, so things like that. There are some modular designs that are already approved by the state in terms of building and safety, right?
Right.
Review. So there are some benefits there. We're going to say, we're not going to duplicate services. Our goal is not to, you know, to gouge you. Our goal is to make it easier, right?
Easier.
We're sort of like the least of the issues in terms of expense, I have to say, unfortunately.
Yes,
It's not
yes.
it's not cheap, this whole development world, but there's definitely a payoff.
Yeah, it's not cheap. And I think on top of the fact that it's not cheap, it's also not as easy to put together a team. So working with the right people and having somebody like you in their corner to really help them through it is just going to save them time and money. And believe me, in development, you can make some pretty big expenses, right? That you probably didn't anticipate. So avoid all
Yeah.
that. Reach out to Stacy, reach out to me, and we'll see you guys on our ADU Play community. We do have a women's ADU mastermind every month. If any of you ladies want to tap into the ADU world, maybe you want to build one, or maybe you want to just tap into the space and you want to build confidence, you want to build relationships with other women. We have people like Stacy, Jamie, and other people who really bring a lot of knowledge to the table, and we're just there to create safe space for one another, and really help each other in the development world. So thank
Just
you
like in
again,
school.
Stacy.
It's just like in
Yeah,
school. If you have that question, there are no dumb questions. If you have the question, somebody else has the question too.
yeah, and you really have to just put yourself out there. Don't care about what people think. I mean, when I first
Yeah.
got started, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was following contractors, I was following architects, I was following people like you, like Jamie. I was just like putting myself out there, not caring what anybody thought, because at least I was doing something to get somewhere. And
Mhm.
now I'm very proud of like old Steph, 5 years ago, and who she is now.
Yeah.
But it took time. So I think now I really enjoy giving that back to other women who I understand that maybe they lack confidence. And it just takes a simple call on a monthly basis with other women who they understand also have limited beliefs, or also have certain struggles, or not. Maybe they're killing it in their space. And it just takes for you to see that so that you can feed off that energy and continue to grow. So that's kind
Yeah.
of the
Thank
whole
you.
concept with that. And yeah, I'm really grateful for this episode. It was super insightful. I learned a lot. I hope you guys did too, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.